Some of you listeners might be running an organization that is deeply entrenched in a mission to maybe help people or a cause. And sometimes that mission can actually usurp your ability as a leader to create a great culture. It can be very challenging to balance both the culture of your business or organization with a strong mission. Our guest today has some of these challenges, but has turned the corner to figure out how to manage both. Today, we welcome Dr. Perry LaRoque onto the show. He is the founder and president of Mansfield Hall, a residential college support program for students with autism and other related neurodiversities. He built this organization based on a passion that he had to help solve these challenges for college-ready, neurodiverse people who might not be able to thrive on a college campus without some support. He's got a team of young professionals who are scattered around the US and has an organization where his team is providing a great service while also thriving in their jobs. Dr. Perry LaRoque, welcome to How I Turned the Corner.
Great. Thanks for having me, Kendra. It's good to be here.
So tell us a little bit about your team. Who do you have that's on your team?
Yeah. Well, so as you said, we are a residential college support program, and let me give you a little context only because it'll help frame the type of employees that we have. So, because we're this residential college support program that focuses, on kids who are neurodiverse, the best practice in our industry, and the expertise I brought to it was understanding that when kids struggle in college, that they struggle in more than just the academics. So we find out that they struggle in independent living skills and social skills and in understanding how they're able to contribute to the world. And so what we built at Mansfield Hall was a way to sort of address those four core domains that we call learning, living, giving, and engaging, in order to sort of provide this holistic approach to a college student with a disability to help them be more successful in college. And so based on those four core areas, the teams that we build really match the kind of support that we're providing. And so, at the director level, we have academic directors, which are like educators and special educators. At the social skills level, we work with speech and language pathologists and community outreach directors who work on aligning volunteer opportunities and internships. We have our directors of student life who are like social workers that are kind of managing the overall plan. But then underneath that, we have a whole supporting cast of coaches who are fresh out of college generally, and sort of supporting the mission through the work that they're doing and helping the students kind of achieve their goals. And then beyond that, of course, we have all the whole supporting cast, the facilities managers and the chefs and, and all the subcontractors that kind of help with the mission as well in a indirect way. Wow.
That's great. So it sounds like you have three locations, Washington, Wisconsin, and Vermont, right?
Oregon.
Oregon. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, of course. Oregon. Forgive me. Yes. Northwest. I should have just said. Yeah. So you've got folks, scattered around the country. How do you keep everyone connected?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it has been one of the biggest challenges. We started Mansfield Hall as, I started it on my own. I was a professor for 7 years and saw this huge need for more support in this area for these types of kids. And then shortly thereafter, my brother joined me. He was a school psychologist, and he joined me in the venture and helped us open our second location. And so in a lot of ways, we were this family organization. And that's not just because it was my brother and I who had, originally sort of launched it. It's that a lot of the people who were there on day one were inspired by the movement and the mission of the work that we were doing, because we were one of the few programs in the country that were doing this kind of work. And so there, just yesterday, I was actually having our executive team meeting. And at that executive team meeting, out of the 6 of us, 3 of the people have been there for over 7 years, and we've been only open for 10. And so they've become family largely as well. But we were all in Burlington, Vermont when we first started the organization. And when you start a new organization, we would joke about it's all hands on deck. Everything was a fire alarm status as it happened, and we fixed the bike as we rode it. And a lot of that mission and a lot of the camaraderie wasn't around pulling something like this off. And that's what really united us, that first generation of staff. What really united us was the mission and the movement and doing something that hadn't been done before. And we developed really close bonds. And I was really close with every single person that worked there. I recruited everybody that came and worked with us in that first year. In fact, some of my former college students came and worked with us. But when we started to expand, the first one was Madison, and then more recently was, Eugene, Oregon. The ability for me to build those sort of intimate relationships with people to advance the mission just really was mitigated to some extent, not only by distance, but as size of the organization. I mean, we started with like 6 people. We're up to about 70 now. And so just the ability for me to have the time to sit with someone and not be the man or, the boss, it makes it more challenging because so much of the goodwill that we started upon was in my passion for the mission and was, the hopefully the inspiration that I could pass on to other people about the work that we're doing. And then that just got diluted to some extent because we had so much more employees. And so it has been a really big challenge of figuring out how do we keep everybody focused on the work and the mission and being inspired by the work that we do. And, the simple answer to your question is that we try to do as much cross-site collaboration as possible. We identify, what the problem is of the year. Or, yesterday we spent a lot of time on our OKRs and really trying to identify what are these areas that are site level issues and what are these more company-wide or organization-wide struggles. And then when those are there, whether it's our DEI initiatives or it's increasing retention, we try to create more of these cross-site committees. And then the one area that I've been struggling a lot with is how do I insert, I can't be at all 3 sites at the same time, and I've got 3 little kids, so I can't even travel as much as I'd like to. But how do I insert my passion and vision for the overall organization amongst these people spread across 4 time zones?
Right.
And so a lot of the times we've been playing around with how do we do these all staff meetings so they're not just boring, or as some of my employees say, that could have just been an email. How do we inspire people around the mission? And then more, quite frankly, the work that I've been doing in the past few years is how do I really empower my key employees, my executive directors at each one of those locations, to actually be the inspiring people in the organization. So how do I pass along this mission and this sense of urgency we have to solve this problem to those people so that they can stand in my stead and inspire the staff that they're working with?
Yeah, that's probably the biggest job you have is to keep that second level of management is engaged with the mission as the people that are in your inner circle. Yep. That is your job almost, because if they're not carrying the torch, then you're going to end up with with retention challenges. You're going to end up with mission creep. You're going to end up with all sorts of things. And, and most difficult is not serving the students properly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So tell us about how you've hired. Let's talk specifically about those executive directors. Like, what was the process for bringing those key people on to these low sites?
Slow. I learned the one thing I've learned over the past 10 years is to do it carefully and slowly. You're right. And yeah. I think that it is such an interesting, so my doctorate's in education and I decided to start a business. And so the learning curve there has to be fast, but you learn through a lot of mistakes. In fact, you learn through a lot of like the way you want to accomplish thing from an employee's perspective of like, oh, if I'm the boss someday, I'm never going to do it that way. And then you get into this role where you try to do it in a different way and you realize that it's falling apart because you didn't want to provide the structure and accountability that really drove you as an employee crazy, but then you realize where those confines are and how important it is to put those things into place. And, for me, learning over the years, I didn't understand how much the urgency and the pressure to hire comes into the decisions you make in hiring people. It's not until you lose an academic director the week before school starts and that you are going, we've got to get someone in here, and you start going, I'll take a warm body.
Right.
And you do that a few times and you realize how you just compound these problems when you don't hire the right person, and that the crisis that you are facing boiled into 3 more crises because now you've got an angry family, an unhappy student, and another job opening. And so, for our executive directors, it has also been a learning curve, and the learning curve has been, what am I looking for? And we work in a really tight niche. So we work in a residential program, which is a niche. We work with colleges, which is another niche, and we work with kids with autism, which is a third niche. So ideally, what we're looking for is someone who has residential experience, who has experience with colleges, and who has expertise in autism. And so if you know of anybody,
Yeah.
don't get in touch with us just for the future. But in a lot of ways, it's never enough. That's not enough. In fact, what we've had to do, and I can speak to one of our executive directors, is for me to really think about what is an executive director's job, right? The executive director's job isn't to do all of the jobs at the site. It's to make sure that those people are doing their jobs, feeling supported, and are inspired by their work, that they view challenges as opportunities, that they feel like working hard is fulfilling and rewarding and not exhausting and, and difficult. And that's a skill set that doesn't come with necessarily autism residential college experience in college. It comes from charisma and a dynamic leader that has requisite experience to support people doing their work. And so I think that at first I was looking for people to first fill, we need them to have these 3 areas, or as close to those 3 areas as possible. And then let's pick the most dynamic leader, right? And most recently, in our most recent hire, I flipped it and I said, let's start with the most dynamic leader we can find, and then try to match their experience to the work that we're doing. And the gentleman that we hired in Oregon just recently fit that profile perfectly, right? If I looked at his resume 3 years ago, he wouldn't have gone past the first interview, because I would have said, okay, no specific experience in autism, no specific experience in college, and no specific experience running a residential program. And any of my parents are listening to this, don't worry, it gets better. But he came from a background of working in post-adoption services, and he was a dynamic leader who had summer camp experience, who has built programs, who has led an organization through system change, through paradigm change, and has written blogs and has spoken nationally about this topic. And so it was clear that his role was a very dynamic leader and someone who was, who had charisma. And so sort of like, that's the leader I want. And then it was like, okay, now let's go to your resume and let's talk about it to see if in principle, in philosophy, do we see the world through the same lens? And, and having these conversations about how you approach post-adoption services is so similar to the work that we're doing. In fact, the protocols and the beliefs and the assumptions that you make if you're doing it really well are really the same assumptions that we're making for students with disabilities. And then you go a little bit further and he says, well, 50% of my caseload had disabilities. I mean, like, these are kids who have some significant mental health challenges, students with autism. And so I worked really well with this dynamic group of kids. And this is how I did it, which was also very much in line with the work we were doing. And then you realize he's a social worker. And then you realize that he had college experiences, and it started to build on from that sense. And so I had the feeling that we found the right person because we approached it from leadership rather than from a skill set.
Yeah. And
yeah.
and I would add to that too, to say that really you can teach so many things,
Right.
but you cannot necessarily teach inspiring people
Right.
and listening and caring for others. I mean, you can kind of teach parts of that, but I think that approach of you really looking at the leadership qualities and then looking for sort of transferable skills in the other areas, and then areas where you probably had to train and teach and he had to maybe take some classes here or there, is a much better approach.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like, and like I said, I mean, I think this is 10 years into this business. I think that we finally sort of figured that out.
Mhm.
And I think we got the right person on the right seat of the bus, which is going to make our lives a lot easier, because I believe that he can really motivate and manage this team with the same sort of philosophy that, you know, that we buy into. And you're right. And a lot of it is replacing names, you know, within that philosophy. It's like, oh, you talked about this with post-adoption services. Well, wait a minute. This is the way we would approach a student who has anxiety around going to a college class. It's the same approach.
Mhm.
It's just a different type of situation, a different name to the student. And, you know, I was talking to one of my employees yesterday. Like I said, our executive team got together yesterday to do our OKRs for the year. And he was telling me about another program that he's working with that he knows of, and it was describing the struggle that the organization had because they had hired a person that was really good at the work that they do, but just didn't have the leadership ability to do it.
Right.
And he said, you know, I feel like we've always tried to be an organization that really looks for what we call the undescribable it factor, like they have it. And because we always felt like we can train somebody to do the work that we do, but we can't train them to have that dynamic nature or that charisma or that ability to inspire or the sort of the passion that is contagious. And, you know, we meet people all throughout our lives every day that just have some of that contagiousness of optimism or passion. And they're really struggling with this person, and they're shocked because of that. Well, they were so good at the work, but when it came time to inspiring other people to do the work, they had such a hard time to do it. And we were saying about it's just such a different skill set.
Hmm. Well, and that kind of gets into this core idea of that some of our listeners have heard us talk about in the past, of getting really clear on your values. And I think of values not like what looks great on a wall or might look really great to the parents or even the students you're supporting, but really like, what are your expectations?
Yep.
And how do those expectations then tie into an interviewing process,
Yep.
and then a management process and a rewards process? And I think that sliver is often missed, because especially in mission-driven organizations, because your mission is so key to bringing in and supporting your students, but it's not the same thing as your expectations for your employees.
Right.
You're not going to say to your parents, we want passionate people. Like they're
Right.
going to be like, my kid isn't passionate. I mean, right? It doesn't
Yep.
have the same alignment. And
Yep.
so has that been what you kind of experienced, is the difference between the mission of the organization and the expectations of the employees?
Yeah. Yes. And you know, we've always said, and to be frank, you know, given our field, which I'm sure it's translated into other businesses in some way or the other. I don't necessarily know how in some of them, but for us, what we're looking for are staff members who have an unconditional positive regard for the people they work with. That we want someone who is coming in because they believe in humanity, that they are there to help someone on their journey, that you know, they're not going to take things personally, that they're going to have this unconditional love for the work that they do. And I always say to families, we start there, right? We want to make sure that someone has an unconditional positive regard for your kid, because everything beyond that is stuff that, again, that we can train. Now, organization skills, all that other stuff, we add that to it, but that's after that one.
Right.
And that is in of itself always not necessarily enough either. But starting from that point, creates a culture of a team that are focused not on the work, but on the mission. Like, we're not focused on what I do during the day, but on the impact that we're making with the students that we have. And I think that's great. And another, I'll just, kind of flip for a second and say that one thing that we did that was really interesting with my executive team, we have, just give you a perspective, we have VP of HR, VP of Finance, VP of Marketing and Admissions. What am I missing? My brother, who's the Executive Vice President, and then VP of Programming, right? And so there's 6 of us who are sort of, in charge of the different departments. And we did some strategic planning this summer. And one of the things was, why do I work here? Like, what wakes me up in the morning, right? And one of the things we said is, you can't say like the students, like that's just too easy. You can't just say the work, because we're all here because of the work. We've all been here for 7 or more years. Like, we're obviously here because we like working with this group of students, but what are the other things? And to understand other people's values in working and to have people be fully honest about that was more enlightening in a sense, because I feel like they said things that they didn't think they should tell their boss. Like, I really like working here because I get paid well, right? I really like working here because I actually have a really flexible schedule, and I can just go take a yoga class in the middle of the day and you're not breathing down my neck about it because I get my work done. Or I'm really here because I like you guys. I actually like working with you guys. And that's a big motivating factor for me to be here. And so sort of sharing all of those pieces of like, why else do I work here other than just the students, also allowed us to recognize that those are really important things for us to continue to do. Like, in this, strategic planning that we did this week, everyone said, what's the agenda for Monday afternoon? And I said, hanging out. Let's go to the bar.
Mm-hmm.
Let's grab drinks and let's go out to dinner. And if we talk about work, we talk about work, but no agenda. We haven't seen each other in a while. We live in a couple of different states. Let's just spend time together, not on a computer. And then we'll start working the next day. And I felt like, again, that was trying to fulfill people's desire to be together and to have fun and to laugh, which were all important things that they said that they worked at the company for.
That's great. I love that so much. And I think it's so good to hear those things as a leader, because what if you suddenly instituted some policy because somebody told you that this is what you should do, and the policy was you must show up from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday? You might lose a really key employee who values the flexibility. Or you might lose people who don't feel like they're trusted over like this just mundane decision, right? And so it's so helpful to like actually ask that question. Why do you work here? What do you get out of this job? And then make sure you keep doing it.
Right. And giving them the space to say it, and I think that is like, people don't ever want to say they work for the money, but people work for the money.
We don't volunteer for our jobs.
Right. And knowing that, or knowing what about it, or, hearing from someone, like we switched last year to, our health, we drastically changed our healthcare program. And so now there's no deductible healthcare, no out-of-pocket costs for people. And we had heard from people that was really important to them, that they have that, and they were willing to give up some other things in order to get that. Just and knowing that was really important to people, and being able to give that to them allowed them, I think, to not focus on the work and to focus on the students. Which is, I've often said, don't work for Mansfield Hall, work for the students who are in our building. Like, I'll give you a paycheck so you guys can live happily, and insurance, you can live happily, and the context to do your work. But Mansfield Hall isn't the work. The work are the kids who need your support.
I love that. Gosh, that's amazing, Perry. So tell us then, I mean, what do you have in the future? What's coming up in the next year or 2 years?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because here we are 10 years, right? I mean, it's a blink of an eye. I had no children and now I have 3. And so, we did this. It's so funny that we're having this conversation today, because we really spent this really painful 8 hours, which is the good kind of painful 8 hours, trying to figure sort of where we are as an organization and what we need to do. And I think a lot of the talk was, there are still some of these things after 10 years that we haven't fully buttoned up yet, or haven't fully solved, or haven't fully figured out. And so let's put those on this really achievable list of OKRs that we can then try to really accomplish over the next 18 months, like really important pieces. Because a year ago, when we had that same meeting, we had put some ideas for expansion. We've created a program called Virtual Hall, which is a online college coaching, executive functioning coaching program that can reach anyone across the country for a much more affordable price than the residential program. And it's been received extremely well. And we know that we could reach more kids. So there's some pieces of like, we really want to start putting some effort and some focus on increasing that program. We've identified a population of our admissions pipeline that we don't end up accepting into our program because they're not interested in college or not college capable. And so how can we serve this group of kids who fit our profile, but who aren't necessarily interested in earning a college degree, but are interested in independent living skills and vocation?
Mm-hmm.
And so we started to look at some of those problems of like, what's next in order to continue to grow. And it was like, it was almost like we sat with it for, 8 months or whatever it was. And I think slowly over time of not talking about it and just kind of working through this long list of ambitions that we had, it started to be really clear that the first thing that we needed to do was to create an organization that had just really good bones and infrastructure and pull some of those pieces together finally, so that the 3 sites in the Mansfield Hall as it is can operate in a way that doesn't feel like everything could be a crisis when it pops up, that it's an organization that's running after a mature organization, let's call it that way, so that then we can take a look at some of these other things without sacrificing any of the quality or the services that we're providing right now. So
Mm-hmm.
we're sort of in that place of buttoning it up. We have all the right people on the right seats on the bus. We've grown fast. How do we get it to work really efficiently? And then to take the opportunity of like, okay, how can we continue to serve more students?
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. Well, that's great, Perry. So I think on that note, that's probably a perfect place to end, is thinking about the future there. And I
Yeah.
hope that this helps you attract some of those amazing people to your team. So thank you so much for sharing your insight. I have to just say also to our listeners, it's a really remarkable thing to hear an academic move into being a business owner. So we have to also just sort of applaud that, because that's not common either.
No, and it wasn't easy.
Yeah. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Perry LaRoque. We will
Yep.
see you on the next show, everybody. Thank you so much.